Q1'22 China EVs and more, where my co-host, Lei Xing, and I will go over the week's most important and interesting news coming out of the China EV, AV, and mobility sectors. We will open the room up at around the 40-minute mark to anyone who's keen to ask us any questions. What Lei and I discussed today is based on our opinions and should not be taken as investment advice. If you enjoy this room, please help us get the word out to other enthusiasts, and of course, tune in again next week. My name is Tu Li. I am the managing director at Sino Auto Insights, a Beijing-based consultancy that helps organizations bring innovative and tech-focused products and services to the transportation and mobility sectors. I write a free weekly newsletter that we pull many of our discussion topics from. You can sign up for it at sinoautoinsights.com, which of course I encourage you all to do. A recently visited New York City Big Apple. Lei, can you introduce yourself?
Yes, sir. This is your co-host, Lei Xing, former chief editor of China Auto Review. And this is episode number 61. Let's start off by talking about He Xiaopeng's tweet. Not tweet, but his WeChat moment. And we will kind of roll this along with the March industry EV sales. So if you missed it or if you haven't heard, so basically He Xiaopeng, he posted a WeChat moment by saying that if the Shanghai and the surrounding area supply chain shutdowns continue as is, then virtually all OEMs in China are going to be in danger of shutting production in May. And then he said, the good thing is that various ministries and commissions and government departments are coordinating, but this is the most serious comment that we've heard yet of the current situation down on the ground.
That's his cry for help.
Yeah, it is, but there's no joking around.
None.
Right? So that kind of gives you an indication of how serious it is from the production side of the equation. Let's not go into details of what it's like in Shanghai because I can't. You're not there. I'm not there. I can't imagine. But we can only presume through all whether it's WeChat, whether it's news, our friends telling us what's going on the ground, and it's not looking good.
The things that we do know, Lei, is that the numbers aren't going down in any significant way.
The COVID numbers.
The COVID positive numbers aren't going down, which pushes out the recovery every single day. And the other thing we want to make note of is that He Xiaopeng's or XPeng's manufacturing is in Guangzhou. It's not in Shanghai. So, number one, Guangzhou recently was put on semi-lockdown. Certain parts of the city were put on lockdown.
Different districts.
Yes. But this tells you how integrated the supply chain is because he's likely getting tier 1 level supplies or parts from Shanghai or somewhere that's under lockdown or restriction. Because again, his factory or XPeng's factories are in Guangzhou. So
sure, and this is a national thing, not a regional thing, as far as supply chain is concerned. And we've heard from NIO, who said they were affected by supply chain issues as far away as Jilin province, right?
Right.
That was one of the cause for the shutdowns. And I just want to kind of recap quickly the major numbers that were put out recently by the 3 different organizations to help everybody kind of catch up on what's been the situation as far as production sales, mostly sales in Q1. So the Ministry of Public Security was the first to announce the registration numbers, and these are more actual numbers, like rather than sales. A lot of those include exports. So the Ministry of Public Security numbers were 1.11 million NEVs registered in China in Q1, and that's almost 17% of the roughly 6.5, 6.6 million autos. And by the end of Q1, nearly 9 million NEVs are on the roads in China, and that's nearly 3% of the automobile park. And the CAAM numbers in March was 484,000. That's nearly 22% of the market penetration. And Q1 was over 1.25 million units. And that's nearly 20%. But remember, if we compare the 1.25 versus the 1.11 from MPS, then we can kind of infer that roughly, let's say 150,000 were exported. That in itself is still pretty significant. And then the CPCA numbers are just relatively smaller because it only includes passenger vehicles. 455,000 for March. Q1 was 1.19, but the interesting numbers were the penetration rates among the three different buckets, right? The retail penetration rate for Chinese brands was 46%. Now, obviously, BYD was a huge contribution to the plug-in hybrids. And then for the premium brands, which includes, like NIOs and others.
Hi-Fi.
Yeah, 32% penetration in March. And for the foreign mass brands, which includes, the VWs, Toyotas, Chevrolets, Buicks, Fords, 4.3%. So that kind of tells you the gap, right?
Yeah, 32% on the premium side is pretty significant.
Yeah, so those numbers look really rosy. That's Q1, but this is the calm before the storm, right? I think people are kind of scared to guess as to what kind of numbers we're going to see in April. For example, Tesla has been shut down, right, for what? Today is the 14th, 15th, 1 and 2 weeks.
Yes.
Are we going to see a production zero? Probably not, but it's not going to look great, for April. And what's your intel, of production resumption? I think we've heard some chatter.
Lei, let me back this up just a little bit. Let me throw out just for context. So 3.5 million cars, NEVs were sold last year in China.
Yeah.
We're at 1.2 for Q1 for China this year. So we're already tracking at smashing that full year number in 2021 if we just multiply.
Right. Full year, based on the Q1 numbers adjusted, is still looking at 5 million.
Yes.
But we have this situation.
Yeah. And you said export numbers were 300,000, you said? Or one something?
Roughly 150,000, let's say. Yeah.
So remember last year that about 500,000 cars were exported, NEVs were exported from China, mostly to Europe, mostly or a good portion of them by Tesla. And so we're about to smash that number too, because we track 150 times 4, we're at 600,000 units, right? And remember, always a reminder that Q1 is notoriously the slowest quarter in China auto sales, okay? So looking good for Q1. The uncertainty comes into Q2, and we have to remember that Jilin province, so Changchun is the capital of Jilin province, but Shenyang is also an automotive hub for many of the Germans, ex-Mercedes, Toyota's up there as well. And so just think about FAW, whoever their JV partners are, they have factories up there. So Jilin, because Shanghai has really sucked most of the air out of the room, we have to remember that Jilin province is still under lockdown as well. And I don't see that opening up, unfortunately, until May.
Yeah, the context is, if you look at the numbers reported nationally, 95% of the cases are reported from Shanghai, right? Roughly.
Yes.
The rest are scattered in other areas, but not as significant or serious as Shanghai is reporting.
The fact of the matter is, I think over 95% come from Jilin province and Shanghai.
Yeah.
And Shanghai's about 25 million people as the city, but it's it's not considered a province, but it's effectively, anyways, you think of it as almost like a province.
Yeah. I'm sure people over, probably including yourself, in Beijing and Guangzhou are stocking up.
We have a refrigerator freezer that's being delivered tomorrow.
Jeez.
Yeah, there's a lot of uncertainty. We are still okay in Beijing where I live. So knock on wood.
Yeah.
And just another thing about Jilin province, there's about 25 million people in Jilin province as well. And so we're talking a fifth of the size of the United States. No, less than a fifth of the size of the United States. And so, wow. And then Guangzhou, there's pockets. Shenzhen is out, which means that BYD should be okay to resume production. But
remember He Xiaopeng's comment.
Yes. So let me explain my background, at least initially, from a work experience standpoint. My first job was at General Motors. I started in the production control and logistics department. So we were, as a department, responsible globally for keeping plants running. Okay, so my first job was at a factory at the Orient Assembly Plant. Did that for 8 months. I think about 8 months, and was the lean manufacturing resident. So we fixed and resolved issues on the line. My second job was as material availability coordinator. So I chased parts for new model year product launches. So a vehicle might have 25,000 parts on it, and for a mid-cycle enhancement, you might change 1,500 of those parts. And so if they're new parts, they need to get engineering approved and then manufactured on production tooling. That was my second rotation. Third rotation, logistics liaison. So I managed transportation for 2 assembly plants at GM. Some of the parts were shipped via rail, some parts over the road trucking. And so, my background in this is like really, really, I understand at an intimate level, unfortunately, what's going on here.
Yeah, and another issue I think that He Xiaopeng's WeChat moment alluded to, actually it's hiding in his comments somewhere, is not only the supply and the production itself, but the logistics is another huge issue that China is trying to resolve in recent weeks and months, because it's the regionally managed differences that are making it difficult, right?
Yes.
So not only will you have to, you have to wait as an OEM, you got to wait for the suppliers to produce, but those parts have to get to you, right? So it's and
then the third part, Lei, is that people need to be able to go out and buy these cars.
Exactly.
If a good part of the country, if Shanghai's locked down, let's say, and I'm making this number up, a fifth of vehicle sales comes out of Shanghai.
Probably not that much, but still.
But you're right. It's a multifaceted challenge that needs to be resolved. And when you see companies like GM who have a closed loop system in Shanghai, who I also believe is still manufacturing, when you say closed loop, I'm saying that most of their suppliers are in Shanghai and are able to still manufacture. But when you see a city being locked down, and then you also see manufacturing or OEM still producing, there's likely 2 reasons. Okay. It's likely that they've stockpiled parts, so they bought ahead and they just have a ton of parts that they're going to run out of very soon. And I think that's what He Xiaopeng is alluding to a bit, right? Because some of these companies, Chinese factories that I've been to, are not really known, or they don't push the just-in-time thing, right? They carry a decent amount of inventory. And so that might give you a week, that might give you 2 weeks worth of production before you start running out of parts. And then there are certain parts that you need to assemble sequentially. So let's say, for instance, if you don't have part X from Lei Fastener Company, I can't do the next job. I can't build the rest of the car. Some parts, you can build the entire car. But if it's like a door handle, you can build the car and then put the door handle on after the fact. So there also might be ways to build to a certain point and then wait for a certain part to get shipped to you. Okay. And jumping back to the truck driver, they're getting tested every day. And the highways are being restricted. So it's not only that there might not be enough truck drivers, but that they might not be able to deliver the part into the city. So many things going on. And as we are at April 15th, it just looks less and less likely that any type of production is going to start in the next couple of weeks.
Well, I think the latest intel with her some chatter that NIO seems to be on a way back up. I don't know. Have you seen this? That they said that they worked out some of the supply issues.
Yep.
But still no exact date of return to production. And I think I saw a tweet from Ele. He mentioned there was 2 dates put out there, April 18th and May 15th.
Mm-hmm.
So that kind of gives you an idea. The best scenario is, right, for companies like Tesla, you lose half a month, more than half a month, maybe 3 weeks of production.
Right.
So for April, I think it's not going to be as serious as February 2020 when it was virtually, right, it tanked.
Zero.
Oh,
Yeah.
not zero, but tanked, right? Huge.
Right.
It's not going to be like that, but this makes me think that for the first time in a long time, Q2 overall, if you look at, not only NEVs, including everything else, might actually be lower than Q1. This is a possibility. And that hasn't happened. Usually Q2 is higher than Q1, Q3 is higher than Q2, and then Q4 is, the biggest quarter of the year. So that's very possible, I think.
The one thing that I believe you hope for as well is that there's this miraculous recovery in the next few weeks. And because we're in the first period of Q2, there is still a possibility to make up any lost units via working overtime in May and June. Okay. But if that happens, that's amazing because that means that Shanghai is probably back up. Jilin is probably back up. And so that's the best case scenario we could hope for.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, if numbers do not drop significantly, it just pushes out any type of sector-wide recovery in production, which is completely unfortunate.
But as far as, brand rankings are concerned, you're going to definitely see Tesla fall way down the list, right? I mean, everybody else is okay. BYD seems to be okay, right? Others seem to be okay as long as they're not in Shanghai. And if you look at some of the recent announcements of sales reports, Volkswagen did this yesterday, right? They reported some numbers. GM, Ford. So Ford, interestingly, me being sensitive, in the Chinese press release, they gave out the Mach E numbers, 969. But in the English presser, nothing was mentioned. I don't know why that is,
Really?
why there's that difference. But in March, they delivered, let's just say they delivered 1,000 Mach E's. Is that good? Is that bad? I don't know. It doesn't sound very high, but
I was told the level of challenges or the seriousness of the challenges that they had to deal with was pretty significant. And I'm also being told that they've gotten past the supply part and they've gotten past the capacity part. So they should be able to produce and deliver many more Mach E's, which is great because I think there's still demand and interest in the Mach E
sure,
in the China market. So they could quickly recover.
Yeah, still, and if you look at their overall numbers, 120,000, 125,000 for Q1, including everything, PVs, commercial vehicles, more than half of their sales are commercial vehicles from JMC, Ford and Jiangling branded. But compared to a million units a year some years ago, this is a steep climb back up. And then GM, basically, look at their numbers. Every brand was down except Wuling and Hongguang Mini EV. The whole GM EV sales in China are basically the Hongguang Mini EV.
Right.
And Volkswagen.
let me finish this off with one last Ford comment. The things that you want to make sure of to understand whether or not Mach E production is going to be stronger or maintain some sort of pace. Chongqing is where they build the Mach E's via their joint venture partner Chang'an, and their batteries are built in Xi'an, by BYD. So those two places will likely tell you if they get put on restrictions or lockdowns, that's going to cause some issues with production of the Mach E likely. Please proceed.
Yeah, so I was going to say Volkswagen Group numbers, their official Chinese presser is basically 38,700 NEVs in Q1, including 27,100 ID, which means it's still averaging less than 10K a month.
Yeah.
So still not that level yet, and we're already more than a year since their launch, since the ID4 launch. Right. So that kind of gives you an indication. And
I want to kind of stress this point here because there's only one opportunity. Obviously, you get to launch a vehicle or brand new product, and you have forecasted, and it could be a car, it could be any electric product or any type of product. You have allotted marketing budget for that. And you think that with this marketing budget, we should get a significant number of eyeballs looking at the product, and then assume an attach or a take rate. Okay. And so with the ID series, they've launched all of them in 2021.
Yeah, no IDs this year, no new IDs this year.
Their take rate was a lot less than they thought. And then in addition to the chip challenge, okay, it is very, very, very difficult if your product is in the market for several months to really build that interest after the fact. Okay.
And the third whammy is the Shanghai and Changchun production locations.
Yes.
They're over proportionally exposed than others.
So that's one of the challenges outside of the current supply chain and COVID challenges that Volkswagen has. It's trying to restart a fire after it wasn't even burning very hot. And normally what a car maker will do, and you know this, Lei, they'll put a lot of money on the hood to get those units shipped out and sold. In automotive terms, when I say putting money on the hood, they'll offer discounts. They'll offer some sort of incentive for you to buy that, which craters their margin on the vehicles. But they need to run these factories because they have orders that they sent to the suppliers. So they're getting parts, regardless of whether the vehicle's sold or not. And this is the crazy thing, because we can't look at fundamentals because of a chip shortage, because of COVID. So it's really hard. It's going to be really hard to tell, at least in Q2, the health of a company.
And, interestingly, GM and Ford, they never, well, I guess for Ford, the Mach E is the only EV there is in China, pretty much, right? And then GM and Ford never report group-wide NEV sales, so only single model EV sales. So you don't know exactly, how much the others account for. But April, I think the foregone conclusion is that industry sales will probably be looking at, 30, 40, 50% year-on-year declines. That's my expectation. And hopefully May and June will be better. But that's the current.
This makes the rest of the year very ominous, because the momentum that has been built for the last 24 months in this sector was a huge tidal wave. And then think of it, you're going 120 miles an hour and you slam on the brakes.
Yeah.
It's really hard to get that momentum back, right? And it's not going to be a 2-month thing.
Yeah. Another way to look at this is if we go back to the beginning of the year, we were quite confident it was going to get to 6 million units. And now if you were to tell me that we're still going to get to 6 million units, I'd be, what are you talking about, right? It's that kind of...
That would tell me that every factory virtually was working 3 shifts in overtime on the weekends.
Yeah.
Starting in Q3, basically.
Yeah.
So, hey, I did want to mention this cool little thing that Cadillac did Jay, who's a friend of China EVs and more, he tweeted a picture of a box with an envelope that said Lyric on it. And he said that Cadillac sent him a care package with vegetables and some other things.
Yeah, others have done this also. I've seen on my, WeChat moments that people are showing these care packages delivered by these different brands. And
Yes. And the struggle is real. I feel helpless because whether it's a PR thing, it doesn't matter, right? In time of need, that's a nice gesture and it should be mentioned.
Yeah.
Before we move on to the New York Auto Show, I did want to mention in my newsletter this week, the Newsweek has an article, or on the cover, it says
Bloomberg.
No. Two things. Let me talk about this Newsweek thing first. It was like the world's auto disruptors.
Disruptors. Chang Yishan and who else?
Farley. It was Farley.
Jim Farley. Right.
So, I jumped on my soapbox, wrote in my newsletter. I was like, I was going to give Newsweek a pass because you could argue, hey, Hyundai is really kicking butt. And Ford is kind of turning a corner, it seems. And so, yes. And then not but 2 days after that, Newsweek, or 3 days after, Farley tweets April 26th. That's when we're going to launch the F-150 Lightning. Awesome.
Job one at the Rouge factory. Yeah.
But it said, and it kept on eating at me. I was like, the world's auto disruptors. And I was like, I got to say something. How can you not say Tesla? How can you not say BYD? NIO, Geely, because NIO, if for no other reason, William Li is bringing back battery swapping. My goodness.
Yeah.
Right? And then Geely, they resurrected a Swedish brand, and that Swedish brand created another brand, and now they're trying to resurrect an old British brand. And so oh my goodness, if that's not disrupting. But anyway, so that's why we started this podcast, right, Lei? Because there's a huge blind spot.
But they'll get their turn. So just wait. And right, just you look at the one I tweeted on was it Forbes yes. or Fortune, right? They had that list of people, and look who's on there, right? William Li and Robin Zeng and these type of people. But it was
so the other digital cover of a magazine I saw this morning was Bloomberg's. And it has Jim Farley in a F-150 Lightning, and in big, bold font, it says, "Hey, Elon, this is a truck." And so, I tweeted, "This is how you poke a bear." And so with that being said, I know that you tried on for size, at least got driven in an F-150 Lightning. And let's lead into your thoughts on that and the New York Auto Show that you attended last week, or earlier this week.
Man, yesterday I left very early in the morning to beat the traffic. So I got into New York City by 7. So you can guess how early I woke up. But it was okay, and New York Auto Show, for those that may not be aware, is actually the oldest auto show in North America since 1900. So 122 years. And I thought it was, close to where I am, and kind of, I was itching to see, to hear more on the EV chatter in particular. And so this show, it kind of started in the morning. Speaking of Hyundai, you mentioned Hyundai. Hyundai was a huge winner because in the morning, they started off with the World Car of the Year award breakfast. So, they had, I think that in this room, there was probably, I don't know, close to 1,000 people or more, maybe around 20 tables.
Wow.
And less than 30 minutes into this thing, so you had the governor of New York. She talked about, investing in EV infrastructure in New York, coming back And kind of was a little bit scary because the day before there was that shooting in a subway. So, but less than 30 minutes into these, VIP speaking, somebody mentioned, lo and behold, the Chinese companies, NIO, XPeng, Li Auto, right?
Long shadow. It's a long shadow.
Yeah. And at my table sat 3 guys from a Mustang club from New Jersey. And we kind of talked, and we talked, they talked about Mach E owners, whether they should be in the club. They allowed them into the club, whether, how they decided on this Mustang brand. And I kind of talked about production in China, and conversation turned into Lincoln, right? Lincoln is now selling more in China than in the US. And then talking about, the Chinese EVs, and they'll say, hey, the Chinese, they'll have a lot of opportunities in electric vehicles and the left 30. And as far as model introductions, Chrysler had that Airflow Graphite, which is just it's just a different variant. There wasn't anything new in particular. And there's a few refreshed models here and there. They weren't even EVs, right? The Jeep Wagoneer L. They did have a 4xe model for the Grand Cherokee, I think, in that bluish shape. And the Hyundai and Kia, they had their newer, refreshed Palisade and Telluride, which is selling very, very well. But speaking of the World Car Year of the Awards, I think it's worth mentioning that Hyundai, of the 6 awards, the Ioniq 5 received the Car of the Year, EV of the Year, and Design of the Year. So it's Triple Crown or hat trick or whatever you want to call it. So
they are crushing it in the US.
The 6 awards, there's the Performance Car of the Year, which was won by Audi e-tron GT. I think the Luxury Car of the Year was won by Mercedes EQS. And the only ICE model was the Toyota, the Urban Car of the Year,
right?
Corolla Cross. I've never even heard of that model. But that tells you the sign of the times that
even in the United States.
No, I mean, the World Car of the Year is supposed to be, right? So yeah. I think it's voted and awarded every time during April, during the New York Auto Show.
Okay.
But right, that's the sign of the times that going forward, I don't think you will ever see another ICE model winning these type of awards.
Right.
Right? That's the beginning of the end, or the end of the beginning, whatever you want to call it.
And I should say this, as BMW in China launches the brand new X7.
X5?
X7. They launched the revised X7 2023, which is an ICE.
Yeah.
Some companies are still milking it.
So other than that, there was a couple of, VinFast, right? VinFast, we've been talking about this. They're just moving fast and furious, right? They announced this battery kind of subscription plan. I was like, oh, that's a page out of NIO.
Right.
Right. Like $35, I think, for one of the models a month. There's a pay per use.
That's cheap.
But there's also a fixed. So 100 or 110 and then 160, depending on the battery size, I think.
Okay.
Per month. So you can kind of, use it whenever. I don't remember the details, but and then 65,000 orders, I believe that's globally for their models. But I think that's the $200 deposit reservations, right?
Sure.
And then today they announced a deal with Amazon Alexa, right? Integrating that into, and then the Electrify America. So ever since they revealed the EVs at the LA Auto Show, there's just been announcements, deals. And what I also did was they had this EV test track down below in level 1. So I waited during lunchtime. They opened up for these different EVs. So there was the VinFast VF8. So I kind of rode in that. The Kia EV6, the Volvo C40, and the Indy 1. So Indy is another, I'll share a comment. I sort of interview Andre Hudson, the head of design, and I'm going to quote him. I put down some notes. The VinFast VF8 is nicely built. Nice quality, nice interior. And the guy who was driving it was Pininfarina thing, right? With the little cockpit style buttons down below the center stack. But I thought it was, I mean, it's almost 100% production model. And the guy said deliveries should start in November, first imported, and then 2024 is when they plan the North Carolina production, right? But it's nicely built EV. I think I would rank it high among the ones that I tried. The worst, by the way, would be the Indy one, because that was a bit of a makeshift. It's got the red buttons. It's got the Windows interface on the screens. There's holes everywhere. It was shaky. It was a prototype, but still.
Did you have to sign a waiver?
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. God bless you.
I didn't really like the Volvo C40 because for some reason they told me you can either shoot videos without talking to the driver, or you can talk to the driver but without shooting the videos. So I got turned off by that. I don't know. Maybe it's company policy. And then the EV6 is nice. But then Hyundai outside of their booth, they had their own track upstairs for the Ioniq 5. So I again sat in Ioniq 5 and took a spin twice around the track, this time on a passenger side. And remember, I test drove sometime last year at a local dealer. But this time, I kind of, after they won the award, I really can see why. Sitting in the passenger and this guy driving, and he was telling me about the battery degradation, the range, how he's been doing this, accelerating, braking all morning. And the range, the state of charge was actually pretty good, he told me. AC was on, 68 degrees, full blast. And the interior, just the space, the way it was designed, and the exterior design and the interface, the HMI balancing, the screens and buttons. I thought of all the ones that I test drove, I can see why it won all that award, really.
Right.
And the F-150 Lightning, just, the platinum version, the top version, was, all these, not gimmicks, but like 180-degree lie flat seat with massaging and that center console with the station you can put your laptop on, and the shifter you can make it flat. So the center, the place where you put your computer on can lay flat on top of that.
They still have a shifter?
Yeah, the shifter
Okay.
into drive and park.
Exactly. Okay.
We tried that acceleration, 0 to 60 was something like 4 seconds, a little bit more than 4 seconds.
So who had the longest lines?
VinFast. I waited almost an hour. But one part of the reason was due to this guy shooting some videos. They only have one car while the other brands, they had 2 cars. So I was like, oh my God. But it was worth it. I think quality, I think it passes. I believe it passes.
Those have to be hand-built parts, right?
Yeah.
Especially if there's only one car available.
And the guy from Indy, I was at the press conference, and Andre Hudson, and he stayed and answered some questions from the media. And I was talking to him, and I said, what about Chinese brands coming pretty soon and competitors? And here's what he said, and I'm quoting: "Certainly, everybody is a competitor. The landscape will be amazing the next 2 to 3 years, and the change completely with the plethora of EVs in the space, and certainly see them." So, and then he said, maybe even 4 to 5 years ago, as an auto designer, you didn't really care about what was happening in China. Today, to me, it's some of the most innovative and advanced design as well. So we're certainly staying aware of what's happening, knowing at any time those products will be over here. That's what he said.
Without question.
Yeah. But Indy, I don't know. It seems to be, I don't know. It's a startup. I think they only have like a few dozen people.
But let me remind you, Lei. So I read up a little bit about Indy, and they basically outsource entire functions of development to external companies. I think they develop the battery and the UX in-house, but other parts of it are not.
And then he talked about manufacturing. They're looking at locations in the U.S. And I asked him, will it be greenfield or existing plants? And he said existing. So that also gives you an indication.
You better believe that the Chinese EV companies are talking to JLL. They're talking to CBRE to look also, right, for these factories. And so we should see in the next, I'd say 30 months, a few different deals for an old factory in Illinois, Indiana, Ohio, that's going to be rehabbed, invested $250, $300, $400 million. And now it's going to build EVs or
so the
something.
Interesting thing is they're taking orders for the Indy 1, $45,000. And they said, delivery expected next year and the second half of next year. But I don't know. I mean, you don't even have a place of production yet.
So, Lei, I will remind you that back in 2004, the Tesla Roadster was effectively a kit from Lotus with
Evora,
Tesla powertrain, right? Yeah. And so, Indy, I'm not saying Indy will be the next Tesla, but we have to remember that these companies, some of these companies are humble beginning, right? Like the two founders of Tesla are not part of the company anymore. And effectively, Elon, as one of the largest early investors, took over and got a co-founder role. But
he seems to be going off track a bit past couple of days. If you know what I mean.
Yeah. But it's nice to be able to say, I'm just going to buy this company, at a 70% premium of what it was trading at the day before I bought 9% of it. Anyways.
Yeah, the other thing about Indy was rather, I don't know whether people saw this, but in the skateboard that they show, there's dual motors. The one in the front and the one in the rear are supplied by Jinjin Motors, a very prominent company in the space, Chinese company.
So I looked on LinkedIn at the management team, and there are a few
Chinese
people that seem pretty well connected. So I think there's strong Chinese ties to it. But also, how was the fit and finish of the F-150 Lightning? Because that has to be a pilot. That has to be coming off production.
It's fine. It's F-150. I mean, what can you expect? It's right. The interior it is what it is.
So no, you didn't see any noticeable quality or fit and finish problems.
Oh, they had on the Chevrolet booth. They didn't announce anything pretty much, but I saw the Silverado EV. It is humongous. I don't know why they made it that big. So the F-150 Lightning or F-150 in general is already big. I think the Silverado EV is almost a third bigger than the F-150 for some reason. It's huge. And the thing that made it even bigger was the small boat EVs that sat beside it.
Oh, geez.
So other than that, I think that's pretty much it. I also talked to Zero Light, Barry Hoffman. That's an interesting conversation.
How's that?
Oh, it's great. The kind of the, what do you call that? The CGI, interaction with the car and
what they do is amazing.
Yeah, it's awesome. And he showed me something else on his phone, which was pretty cool. Couldn't really talk about it, but my general summary is there was no Chinese brands, but the Chinese narrative, the Chinese EV narratives was equally there.
Still loom large.
Yeah, still loom large, right? The E-Motors company was represented there. VinFast as a non-European or another Asian company coming to the U.S., right? It's all relevant. And I was, talking to people, and I would say I wouldn't be surprised if at the LA Auto Show some Chinese brands show up. It could be possible. Or CES.
I'm going to speculate, Lei. There might be one or two in Detroit in September.
Hell yeah.
I'll just say that. because I get this feeling. But you and I have talked a lot about production. We've talked about the New York Auto Show. So we still have a couple topics I know that you and I wanted to touch on. The one last thing I did want to mention, because we were talking about Tesla a little bit about the New York Auto Show, was that Elon has to be anxious about getting Berlin Giga online very quickly because of what's going on in Shanghai.
Yeah.
And so there has to be a ton of pressure on those guys in Berlin to get that factory up and going. The one thing I will mention was that Shanghai Giga, at the very early stages, were getting a lot of their parts from Fremont. My assumption is that initial production parts for Berlin Giga would have likely have shipped from Shanghai. So they're probably having to rethink and ship a lot of their parts as kits over to Berlin Giga from Fremont now. So the operations team at Tesla must be working overtime to really try to reconfigure production, especially because losing days, we're not talking hours, we're losing days of production. And
Weeks.
they want to, yes, and they want to get 1.5 million units in 2022 shipped. So I'm betting Elon is not letting up on that number. And I'm betting that he's making Fremont and Berlin and Austin really take on that heavy load from Shanghai Giga for now. So,
and the other thing was the interesting announcement by RoboSense and TuSimple that they're working together to have RoboSense fit their lidars on the L2 and L4 trucks. But I've confirmed with both RoboSense and TuSimple that this is only focused on the China business side of it. So if you look at the pressers, the person who was quoted from TuSimple was not Xiaodi, but was Chen Mo. And if you know, recently Chen Mo, I mean, he left as chairman, right? But now he's trying to start something new in China. So this deal is only focused on the Chinese market. And you haven't seen any announcement from TuSimple here in the US because it's not relevant yet.
I'm wondering if there will be, because you and I agree that there will be a separation.
Yes.
What, if any, relationship they will have in the future as these two separate entities? That'll be interesting to see because, yeah, Chen Mo is effectively now the head of TuSimple China, TuSimple East, and then
TuSimple West.
Yeah, Xiaodi is, because they're not separated yet, so we'll just call them TuSimple West and TuSimple East, is now the CEO of the US entity. Who is going to take on Europe? Who is going to take on other parts of Asia?
Well, maybe they I don't know, they'll just not bring that onto the plate at all.
Yeah.
Who knows?
But the negotiation must be pretty intense, pretty messy. That brings us to the end of this week's show. Lei and I thank you for tuning in. My name is Tu Lee, and you can find me on Twitter at Sino Auto Insight. That's SinoAutoInsight. You can find Lei on Twitter at Leixing77. That's LEIXING77. If you wouldn't mind rating and or reviewing us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you grab your podcast from, we'd appreciate that as well. Even better, if you enjoy this show, please tell your friends about it. Please join us again next week as we track down all the latest news on China, EVs, and more.